Cisco switches are great. They help connect devices on your network. They use a special software called Cisco IOS. iOS stands for Inter-Network Operating System. It's like the brain of the switch. You can tell the switch what to do. You do this by using the Cisco IOS Command Line Interface, or CLI. The CLI is like a text-based command prompt. You type in commands to configure the switch. Don't worry, it's not as hard as it sounds. Once you learn a few basic commands, you'll be configuring switches like a pro in no time. To access the CLI, you need to connect to the switch's console port. You can use a special cable called a rollover cable. This cable connects your computer directly to the switch. Once connected, you can use a terminal emulation program like PuTTY to access the CLI. Now you're ready to start configuring. We'll cover some basic configuration steps in the next few sections. Get ready to become a Cisco switch whiz. When you first connect to a Cisco switch, you'll be in User Exec mode. This mode is very limited. You can't make any configuration changes here. It's mostly used to view basic information about the switch. To do more advanced stuff, you need to enter Privileged Exec mode. You can enter Privileged Exec mode by typing the command, enable and pressing enter. Now you have more power. You can view and change the switch's configuration. But wait, there's more. Within Privileged Exec mode, you can access Global Configuration mode. This is where the real fun begins. To enter Global Configuration mode, type Configure Terminal and hit enter. Now you can configure settings that affect the entire switch. Things like the switch's hostname and passwords are set here. You can also access sub-configuration modes. These modes let you configure specific features or interfaces on the switch. For example, you can enter Interface Configuration mode to configure a specific port on the switch. That covers the different Cisco switch operating modes. Understanding these modes is crucial for configuring your switch. Make sure you're comfortable switching between them before moving on to more complex configurations. Now you know about the different operating modes. Let's talk about how to actually configure stuff. Cisco IOS commands follow a specific structure. It's important to understand this structure to use the CLI effectively. Most commands consist of three parts: the command, the keyword, and the argument. The command tells the switch what action to perform. For example, the command show is used to display information. The keyword specifies a particular parameter or option related to the command. For instance, show running config displays the current running configuration. Finally, the argument provides a specific value for the command or keyword. For example, in the command hostname myswitch is the argument. It tells the switch to change its hostname to myswitch. Not all commands require all three parts. Some commands, like enable, only require the command itself. Others might require a command and an argument, like clockset. Understanding the basic command structure is essential for navigating the Cisco IOS CLI. It allows you to interpret and execute commands effectively. Now that you know how commands are structured, you can start configuring your switch with confidence. Section 4. Initial configuration of a Cisco switch. It's time to configure your Cisco switch. We'll start with some basic but important settings. First up, let's give your switch a proper name. This makes it easier to identify on the network. To do this, enter Global Configuration mode by typing Configure Terminal. Now type hostname followed by the desired name. For example, hostname myswitch will change the switch's name to myswitch. Next, let's set passwords for different privilege levels. This adds an extra layer of security to your switch. You can set passwords for User Exec mode and Privileged Exec mode. To set a password for User Exec mode, use the password command under the line console 0 configuration mode. For Privileged Exec mode, use the Enable Secret command in Global Configuration mode. It's a good practice to encrypt your passwords. This makes them more difficult to crack. You can use the Service Password Encryption command to enable password encryption on your switch. Finally, let's set a banner message. This message is displayed when someone connects to the switch. It's a good place to put a warning message or login instructions. To set a banner message, use the banner MOTD hash command. Replace hash with any character you like. Type your message between two instances of this character. Congratulations, you've configured some basic security settings on your Cisco switch. Remember to save your changes, which we'll cover in the next section. Section 5. Configuration files and saving your settings. You've made some changes to your Cisco switch configuration. Great job! But hold on, those changes aren't permanent yet. Cisco switches use two configuration files, running config and startup config. The running config is the current active configuration. Any changes you make are immediately applied to the running config. However, these changes are lost if the switch reboots. That's where the startup config comes in. The startup config is the configuration that's loaded when the switch boots up. To save your changes permanently, you need to copy the running config to the startup config. You can do this by using the copy running config startup config command in privileged exec mode. This command copies the entire running config to the startup config. Alternatively, you can use the write memory command, which achieves the same result. Always remember to save your configuration after making changes. This ensures that your settings are preserved even if the switch reboots. Now let's move on to understanding IP addresses in the next section. Section 6. Understanding IP addressing. In networking, devices need unique addresses to communicate with each other. These addresses are called IP addresses. Think of them like phone numbers for your devices. There are two main versions of IP addresses: IPv4 and IPv6. IPv4 addresses are 32-bit numbers, usually represented in decimal notation. They consist of 4 octets separated by dots. Each octet represents a number between 0 and 255. Subnet masks are used with IP addresses. They define which part of the address identifies the network. The other part identifies the specific device on that network. The default gateway is another important concept. It acts as a door between your network and other networks. It's the IP address of a router that connects your network to the outside world. Understanding IP addressing is fundamental to networking. It allows devices to communicate with each other and access resources on different networks. Now let's explore the various methods to connect to your Cisco switch in the final section. Section 7. Connecting to your Cisco switch. There are several ways to connect to your Cisco switch for configuration and management. The most common method is through the console port. This involves connecting your computer directly to the switch using a rollover cable. Once connected, you can use a terminal emulation program like PuTTY to access the switch's CLI. For remote connections, you can use SSH or Telnet. SSH is a secure protocol that encrypts communication between your computer and the switch. Telnet, on the other hand, transmits data in plain text and is less secure. To use SSH or Telnet, you need to configure the switch to allow these connections. You'll also need the IP address of the switch and appropriate login credentials. Terminal emulation programs like PuTTY can be used for SSH and Telnet connections as well. These programs provide a command line interface for interacting with the switch remotely. That concludes our quick guide to configuring Cisco switches. Remember to practice these concepts and explore additional resources to further enhance your networking skills.